we all know that our membership and our business partners are bigger than just the traditional residential resale marketplace. So you've all been working a lot on rentals in the last couple of years, and Michael Lucarelli is going to come up to talk to us a little bit more about the state of the rental union. Michael?
Hello, hello. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to see so many friendly faces, people that we've been working together with for years, and huge thanks as always to Sam and the wonderful team at RESO for putting on these events and then bringing everyone together so that they can collaborate. So today I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the rental trends that we are seeing that are impacting our industry. And we have a little bit of a unique take on it, and we're going to share some information, going through some pain points, and then some possible solutions for how we as an industry might be able to address what we're seeing here for this year, 2022, which is already blowing right by us. So, um, starting here, I'll start off with I consider myself a renter expert because I am a renter ever since I moved out, and I've been renting since I was like 19 or 20 years old. So, definitely cover those bases in terms of experience. And then on top of that, I was a former agent. So I did have my real estate license. I worked with agents at a local brokerage where I got to see everything that they did with rentals, working with them at open houses, looking at all the above. And then on top of that, CEO of RentSpree. So today, like I said, we'll talk about some of the rental trends that are impacting our industry today so that we can be aware of how we can react or be maybe proactive perhaps regarding some of those trends that we're seeing. And then on top of that, we'll talk a little bit about inventory. So I know that there's a couple different solutions out there about how we can really tackle this inventory problem. I have a little bit of a different spin on some of the data to share with you that might shed some valuable light and information as to how we can possibly look at other solutions to overcome some of the inventory shortages that we're seeing. And then on top of that, we'll look at the agent journey. So we've mapped out really just a ton of data points about how agents are really interacting with rentals. And so I think this will be really valuable for you guys to see just a couple of the key points of how agents are interacting with rentals in this day and age. And then we'll take a look at maybe some possible solutions. And I don't think we'll have a whole lot of time at the end, but if we do, maybe some Q&A as well. So first, let's dive into some of the trends here. So as you can see on the right-hand side, in the blue is the baby boomer generation. And at the time when baby boomers came out, this was the largest generation by far. And this is like maybe ages like 50s to 60s nowadays. However, what you can see is in the center, you have millennials. And so millennials, since they came out, it has dwarfed the baby boomer generation by a couple million. So millennials are by far the biggest generation that we have today in the US population. And so what's interesting about this population is when you combine that with the fact that the median age of a first-time home buyer now is pushing to 36 and or maybe 37. So that means that when people are able to buy their first home, it's pushing a little bit later, getting to be when people are 36 or 37. And so the bulk of these millennials here, they're in their late 20s now, coming through until their 30s. And the meat of it really is people that are about like 30 to 31 years old. And so that means that for those people in the largest segments of our population, there's going to be about 6 to 7 years until they're actually able to purchase a home feasibly. And mind you, for a lot of these people, and we'll talk about this in a second, but it's not necessarily the case that they don't want to buy a home. And we'll talk about affordability and everything like that. And again, I can speak from experience here because I'm not a renter by choice. If I could, I would buy a home. So that's what I think is facing a lot of the millennials here that we're going to kind of dive into. And so if we look at some of the data that we can see, so basically these headlines are common. So this headline here, would-be home buyers may be forced to rent the American dream rather than buy it. There was another data point that came out that I think it said like 1 in 3 renters may just rent forever because they're unable to purchase a home at all. So these are really important trends that we need to be thinking about going forward. And so the reason why we're seeing these types of headlines coming out more and more. So if you look at the change in wages over the past 30 years, they grew by about 50%. However, the home values have increased by about 260% over that same time period. So how can people feasibly afford a home? It's getting more and more challenging, and for some people it's viable and feasible. For others, not so much. So this is really some of the foundational reasons why we're seeing the trends that we are seeing today with regards to these first-time homebuyers being pushed back and back, and even with millennials as well. I mean, the median age of the first-time homebuyer, like I said, it's about 36 or 37, but it may continue to be pushed back. It's to be determined yet once we see in another couple years how that ends up panning out. So looking a little bit more at inventory here. So here we're breaking down inventory by really to make things simple. You have on the right hand side here, there's the pie chart, and in blue you have your business entity. So these are your institutional, corporate, large multi-million dollar property management companies. And as you can see, there's a ton of software solutions available to them that are meant to service really the multifamily industry. So you already have Folio, RealPage, MRI, Entrada. The list goes on and on. These are huge companies and huge software providers that can service this segment of the market. However, what I want to draw your attention to is the left side of this pie chart, which is individual landlords. So these are individual investors, kind of like mom and pops. You can think of someone that maybe a retired couple that they may pick up an investment property to also get some income out of it. And so this actually represents 50% of the rental housing in the US, about 23 million units. And so this half of the market is appealing and very relevant for our industry because this half of the market is most likely to need the assistance of an agent because these agents they may not know how to market the property properly. They may not have access to forms or maybe knowing what kind of liability that they need to keep in mind when they're working through some of these items. So this segment is most in need of agents. However, agents, historically speaking, while they have serviced this segment of the market, they haven't really done, it hasn't been easy for them, namely because there hasn't been many tools available for them. And so this is why we're not going to go into too much detail of it now, but when you look at agents, oftentimes they're asked by landlords, like these individual landlords, hey, can you help me rent out my property? But a lot of the agents, because they don't really have the tools or the resources to do it, the juice for them is often not worth the squeeze. So they have to spend a lot of time on these rentals, and so they end up turning down helping a lot of these landlords, which impacts, a lot of things downstream when you talk about rentals in general and how rentals are really coming into crossover with our industry here. So in the most recent rental housing survey, we can also see that there was about 5 million rentals handled by agents, despite some of the challenges that agents have in working with rentals. And so this is a huge number. Like I said, almost 5 million here over the course of a year. However, how is that impacting with the MLS space? And where is the data going? And how is that really flowing through or not? And so this survey is also very telling because, again, the chart on the right-hand side, you can see that there's 5 million total rentals in the blue bar. However, interestingly enough, less than 2 million of those roughly 5 are actually making their way into the MLS. And so everyone's probably asking the same question, why? Why is that the case? And we'll kind of get into that a little bit once we move on. But basically, it's really telling to see that for 60% of rentals handled by agents, they never end up into the MLS at all. And so this is not good for cooperation, transparency, compensation, a whole host of different things that are being lost when these rentals are not being input by agents. And again, I want to remind you that these 5 million rental units, they're being handled by agents. So it's like, why would they not input these rentals into the MLS? So this is a good question. And so we're going to try to kind of explore that a little bit further with you here today. And by the way, with these rentals, it's roughly 2.4 billion in commission. So it's a huge opportunity again to have this compensation and cooperation amongst agents and brokers. So when we try to understand and answer these questions, we basically, I'll give you guys a little bit of a background on our company. So we have an entire research team. So it's like 3 to 4 people, and their job, like every single day, is just like, what kind of data points can we bring in? We're gathering primary and secondary data from agents, renters, landlords. And so we've gone through and we've mapped out an entire journey of what an agent goes through when they handle a rental. And most people, they may think that there's like 10 to 12 steps, but we've identified 26 different steps that an agent goes through, and we've kind of categorized them here a little bit. But I want to let everyone know that if you're interested to dive in more, because we're not going to go into all the detail, there's hundreds of data points on here. If you're interested, I would be glad to walk any of you through this and we can dive into it. I'm happy to share this information of the full research and findings for what agents are actually doing in all the steps of the process. But again, to break it down, we have 6 or so main categories here. So prospecting, qualifying the landlord, prepare the rental for market. Then there's marketing the rental, developing renter leads, and closing the deal. And so of those 26 steps and these kind of main categories here, I've just picked out a couple that we can kind of look into a little bit more to maybe start to answer some of those questions as to why aren't these rentals ending up into the MLS for that 3 million or so. That's, to me, low-hanging fruit. So we pulled information that we got from 3 different agents. And obviously we spoke with many more than that, but I pulled these 3 because they're very telling, and these are some of the trends that we're seeing in general. So agent number 1 says, when we have a listing, we fill out an MLS entry form 13 to 14 pages long. So this is no secret that we know that a lot of the systems and the data that's being collected is not quite optimized for rentals. It's maybe collecting too much data that's not relevant for rentals. And then in the same vein, it may not be collecting enough of certain things that are necessary. And so this has been talked about before. Nonetheless, I'll highlight this here for you. And I think, I don't know if I've seen 13 to 14 pages, but I'm sure it's not too far of a stretch from some of the experience out there. Agent number 2, when asked if a rental is still available, they'll ask, no, did you find it on Zillow? And then they tell me to check with the MLS next time. So what's happening here is we're seeing rentals are ending up on a marketing platform, a listing site, and these listings are maybe not active anymore. And so it's causing a little bit of a friction there. And so the MLS is actually serving in this case as a source of truth for where the rental data is the most accurate and up to date, but highlights how still that up to dateness can lag behind from the perspective of some agents in some markets. The last agent, agent number 3, says when you put a listing into the MLS and it syndicates, you get a lot of different communications that get lost. And so here we're talking a little bit about some of the transactional kind of complication and confusion. So after that rental goes out, it gets marketed, you get a ton of leads, everything comes through, but then it's like agents aren't really quite equipped to manage this properly. So this is all 3 kind of areas where we can provide more value to agents when we're thinking about how they're inputting rentals into the MLS. So to kind of summarize those 3 agents here, hey, you have an extensive time-consuming experience having to fill the rental form when they're inputting rentals into the MLS, also outdated user experience and user interface in some cases, depending on what they may be used to. Um, and then agent 2, of course, hey, like maybe some inaccurate listing data that's being syndicated out, and maybe some agents or consumers are coming into contact with data that is not accurate or not up to date. And then finally, this last one here, right, like you may lose leads that slip through the cracks. And on top of that, there are also like lack of transactional tools that are not available to help agents with some of these just basic processes that they need to handle. And so to dive in a little bit more deeply here, we can see, there's some really like obvious things that we can do. And this is all about providing more value to agents, so it will increase their willingness to input these rentals into the MLS. And so these are 3 really actionable kind of items here that we can look at. And so first, of course, you want to streamline fields. And so we've also put together basically like shortlisting the rental fields that are going to be necessary, not too much, but not too little, with our team. So again, happy to share this information with the appropriate parties so that we can help to streamline this process. And then improving the UX here so that we're thinking really thoroughly about how the user experience is differing with agents that work with rentals versus those that are inputting properties that are for sale. Of course, ensuring accurate and up-to-date listings. And then later on down here is where you come into some of the more transactional components where there's opportunity to help. So here it's assisting with lead management, providing some kind of transactional tools that can help them. So they're going to get all these leads through. And this is where there's a lot of vendors out there that help, whether it's like a CRM tool or something like that. So all of these represent a huge value that we can provide to agents that can help them to be more likely to input these rentals into the MLS. And like I said, I'm happy to kind of dive in more in depth on all these different data points because, again, it's been primary and secondary research that we've generated together with our team. So um, here's the next question that I have for you. So should we consider mandating rentals to be input into the MLS? So this is an open-ended question that I'd like to pose to everyone here today. I think this is another way that we can possibly solve this problem of not having rentals input into the MLS. There are a lot of considerations and factors to take into account when we think about making these types of decisions. However, there's a lot of benefits as well that can be realized from basically doing this. So first and foremost, it will really help to empower MLSs and to ensure that they are the center of rental activity. Right? I think it's very feasible for that to happen. Like I said, agents are already working with millions of rentals that are not going to the MLS. We might as well just bring them in, and this could be a way to do it. Second is that you can make sure that the MLS is the source of truth for rentals, at least for a huge segment of the rental market right off the bat. So by doing this, you're going to make all the data right and easily accessible and available, which of course, hey, that encourages cooperation and transparency among agents, other MLSs through data shares, even like for consumers as well. You're going to see really a lot of that stuff being brought in, especially from maybe like an ethical perspective too, where the MLS has those rules and regulations in place that are meant to safeguard consumers as well. Next, of course, hey, you're reducing liability. I think all up and down the value chain of stakeholders that are involved in all this process here. So you can reduce liability from, again, like having that cooperation, creating a level playing field for everyone, and then helping brokers to understand what's going on with their agents, giving access to the data. Um, Moving on here, we can talk about increasing compensation too. So there's billions of dollars that are being paid in rental commission. And again, like some of that's not flowing through the MLS. And it's a huge question mark. I think this is probably one of the big questions that you have to ask yourselves if deciding, what should be the compensation requirements for rentals that do go into the MLS. There's arguments to both sides, but in the end of the day, it can increase compensation and cooperation for agents that will be able to now more easily partake in some of the rental business that's already flowing through the MLS now. And then finally, you can improve processes. So you can provide streamlined ways for agents to be able to handle these rentals and equipping them much, much better off to be able to serve these landlords that they would love to service. And all this in the end of the day, it's meant to really provide value to the consumer because when we are thinking about better equipping the MLS to handle rentals, it's gonna encourage agents to handle rentals in a better way. And ultimately, that's what consumers need. Consumers are needing to rent and they need agents to help them. And then, of course, this all belies the point that, hey, these renters, as you saw in the previous slides, they're all gonna become future first-time home buyers. So by providing these types of solutions and benefits, it ultimately helps the agent to service consumers better, and then it can help them to now generate future business for future renters, people that may want to purchase a home at some point later on down the line. So I think it's just a all-in-all lift for the industry once we can, like I said, make sure that MLSs are at the center of the rental activity that's going on as it stands today. And finally, I'll leave you all with we looked at a cross section of some of the partners that we work with, and so we find that some MLSs do require rentals and others don't. And so this is to me very telling that for the MLSs that require rentals, we see that they get almost 3 times the rental listings input into their system per 100 members using that as a baseline. So the proof is in the pudding here. And like I said, it has a big impact of actually getting these rentals into the system. And ultimately, like I said, that can benefit everyone across the board in the entire value chain. So that's pretty much the information that I have for you today.